13th, the Miami Dolphins in Super Bowl VIII, a record-setting third straight appearance. Their opponents, the Purple Gang, the Minnesota Vikings, replete with a hardy core of loyal followers. But their day was ruined by one particular group of men, a unit that dominated the contest from the moment it began. The Miami offensive line, a line some call the finest ever assembled. Their names were Little, Langer, Kuchenberg, Evans, and more. They rocked Minnesota's defensive line back on its heels, and Dolphin fullback Larry Zonka used his incredible strength to run through what remained. Miami tallied 4 times before Minnesota could score once. 2 of the Dolphin touchdowns came from Zonka, whose 145 yards set a new Super Bowl rushing record. It was the Dolphins' second straight championship win, the Vikings' second Super Bowl defeat.
Fran Tarkenton in Super 8 was one of 3 losing Super efforts for you. How long does the hurt linger after something like that?
Well, it's been 5 years since Super Bowl VIII, and the hurt is still there, and I don't think it'll ever go away.
Is it helped out any, Fran, by a belief that I know you have, that the better team won each time?
Well, it really is. When we went into that game, we thought we were the better of the 2 teams. Other people might have thought we weren't, but we did, and we believed we could have won.
And every player has to go into the game thinking that way, doesn't he?
I'm sure both teams today think the same thing. They're the best team.
Fran and I spent a lot of time this week talking to a lot of players, as did our buddy Mike Adamle. But Mike also hobnobbed with the high polloi, the commissioner. Michael?
O'Brien, for the last 18 years, Commissioner Pete Rozelle has ruled the NFL with an iron hand. He was the driving force behind the merger in 1966, and although many of his decisions have been questioned, his integrity and knack for diplomacy have served him and the NFL very well. 2 decades ago, professional football was, relatively speaking, a shoestring operation. A few clubs made money, others were perennial losers. In his 18 years as commissioner, Pete Rozelle has turned the NFL into a very successful business. He unified the league and helped it realize its potential in a television-dominated sports world. Rozelle was a surprise choice as commissioner. He was the 33-year-old general manager of the Rams when the owners met to choose a successor to the late Bert Bell.
I was representing the Rams with Dan Reeves, who was then the president of the club. And, gee, we went, I don't know, about 10 days and had 22 different ballots. And everyone got entrenched. And I guess everyone was ready for a compromise. And I was as surprised as the media and everyone else when they elected me commissioner.
When you first took the job as commissioner, what problems did you see and how did you attack them?
Well, the first big problem involved television because all the clubs were negotiating their own contracts. And so we were competing with ourselves. And some clubs were going to lose out on television altogether. So we had to find a way of pooling television, selling it in a package so that everyone could, get a good amount of money.
1963, Alex Karras and Paul Horney were involved in the betting scandal, and you had to suspend them. Reflect upon that a little bit.
Well, that's the toughest part of this job, the disciplinary aspects of it. We never had evidence, and I'm sure that, on Horney and Karras, that either bet against his own team. They made relatively small bets on their own teams, but they were doing it quite a bit during the season. And it's a firm rule, of course, a player rule, that they won't be involved in gambling on professional football. So I'll never forget when we researched it, and I called Vince Lombardi because I knew he was so close to Paul. And Paul and Vinny came in the office, flew in from Green Bay, so I wanted to see him. So I laid this out in front of Vince, and it really impressed me, his stature as a man, his reaction, because he looked at the information, and he says, "You don't have any choice, do you?" Rather than being a coach and saying, "Look, this isn't so bad, forget about it." He knew what the problem was, how it could affect the league. So that's what all he said. He said, "You have no choice. Let's go get a drink." And I said, "All right."
President Kennedy died, and the NFL did not decide to cancel the games for that weekend. Do you feel that was a mistake?
Sure. It was a very difficult period, and there was no schedule laid out for services for President Kennedy. And I remember on the Saturday, I finally got in touch with someone I'd gone to school with, who was the president's press secretary, Pierre Salinger, who's still a good friend of mine. And he'd been out in the Pacific and was en route back, and I think I got him in Hawaii. And I said, you know, here it is Saturday. We don't know when the funeral is going to be. We don't know what's going to happen. We've got clubs flying all over the country. And Pierre at that time told me, well, I think the service is going to be the first part of the week, and I don't know what else you can do. But obviously, I feel it was a mistake. I wish that we had not played the games.
Pete Rozelle is not without his critics. Ed Garvey, head of the Players Association, is a longtime opponent. And Al Davis, who once led the American Football League, isn't a charter member of the Rozelle fan club either. But the majority of owners, including the ones who questioned his ability in the beginning, think he's doing a good job.
His negotiations with the members of the media, particularly television, has been an outstanding and a most difficult job, and he rises to the challenge day after day.
This year, some interesting changes were made. We went to the 16-game season as opposed to a 14-game season. Did you worry about overexposure prior to the start of the season?
Yes, which is why we sacrificed money on our night games. At the NFL's discretion, we could have 6 of those specials, a minimum of 4, a maximum of 6. We went with 4, those Sunday night games and Thursday. And I think we'll stay at 4 next year, too, rather than going 6 and getting additional money. You have to watch overexposure, but we have constantly. The best barometers are attendance figures and television ratings.
When problems do arise, it's not uncommon for Rozelle to turn to his wife, Carrie.
He has incredible patience, and he's most remarkable. I envy him the patience. But the thing that I find that happens if he's had a difficult day is he smokes 3 packages of cigarettes during that day, and he walks the floor at night. And I don't think either of those things are very good for him. So I'm concerned about his health.
How did you two meet?
We met on a tennis court. Actually, we met at Super Bowl VII, and it was a brief meeting. And during the following week, Pete was still in Los Angeles, and a friend of mine needed a 4th for tennis, called me, and she said, I think you'll like your partner. And I went over, and I liked him a lot. And I immediately started to chase him, but he didn't know it. Caught him, too.
What has happened to you as a person over these last 18 years?
I've grown 18 years older, and sometimes I think more than that. I've enjoyed it. I think all of us in sports who are able to make a living from something that we so genuinely enjoy are just very fortunate.
Well, you have to concur with that. To be paid for something you truly enjoy is a blessing. Despite the winds threatening to blow me into Biscayne Bay, I agree.
Can it grow hair?
It can do anything if it puts its mind to it. It doesn't like to travel because its strength is in numbers and you can't get enough Steeler people into the Super Bowl, tickets being limited. But it'll come through.
Okay, you crazy man. Bryant?
Okay, Mike, I don't know about the terrible towel, but the crying towel figures to be in operation today for defensive backs because with John Stallworth, Drew Pearson, Lynn Swann, and Tony Hill in the game, there'll be at least 2 home run threats on the field at all times. Let's go for another scouting report. Join Dick Enberg and John Brody.
And now the excitement of the matchup between defensive back and wide receiver. And they've said for a long time in this game that the defensive back it's the impossible position to play.
I think it makes it more difficult when you're Dallas defensively because they put an awful burden on their cornerbacks. And they're playing 2 of the best wide receivers in the game. When you're playing Lynn Swann and John Stallworth, you're going to have a problem. They're going to get help in the middle from their safety men, but they're going to need it.
Yeah, with Stallworth and Swann, maybe the best tandem outside in the game of football. 20 touchdown passes caught between those 2 wide receivers.
I really think those statistics might be a little misleading. Terry Bradshaw has implemented the passing game into the offense for Pittsburgh more and more and more to where they even outgained their running game. That used to be their personality. It no longer is. He has an opportunity to go to Stallworth, to Grossman, to anyone that seems to be open, and they all seem to be open quite a bit.
Don't they go after the ball about as aggressively as any set of receivers in the league?
Well, I think it's why they throw the ball as effectively, Dick. When they get a chance to have 3 receivers that'll all go for the ball in the middle of the field and it's simply sacrifice time, they have an extra addition to their offense.
Well, then, how does Aaron, Kyle, and Barnes at the corners and the veteran safeties, Harris and Waters, stop that pass offense?
Well, I think they have to do it in coordination. However, their personality is not to do that so much. You can isolate an Aaron Kyle, and there will be times when Bradshaw is going to find an isolation on Kyle. The other side, Barnes and Washington. However, the less opportunity Dallas gives Pittsburgh to utilize that fact, the better they'll be.
You know, when they go down the middle, they're going to have to not only find off Charlie Waters, but the other sagacious safety of the Cowboys, Cliff Harris.
These are the two factors, in my opinion, that could equalize the defensive secondary play with the offensive receivers. The reason being, I think Harris and Waters both read the quarterback, play the situation better than any two in the game.
When Dallas has the ball, Staubach loves that big tight end.
And he better come to him a lot today, because the wide side is going to be double covered. They're going to try to utilize as much as they can the opportunity for Ham and Taves to play on the tight end, Billy Joe Dupree. However, it won't be that way all the time. Give Staubach enough time, he can beat double coverage with his wide receivers.
Well, Ron Johnson, although a rookie, he's played like a veteran. I guess you can play pretty well when you have all that all-pro talent surrounding you.
I'd say it helps. When you're surrounded by Jack Ham, often by Wagner, Donnie Shell coming in there to help you out, it does give you a slight edge. You see, these fellas play position and situations as well as anybody. I'm looking forward to it. I think it's the bounce of the ball that's going to dictate it.
It's kind of interesting that we were able to feature Ron Johnson and Mike Wagner, and the other two guys with them in that deep secondary are both in the Pro Bowl.
Well, that's the rare trip of this whole game. You've got so many Pro Bowl players. I hope none of them save themselves for the Pro Bowl. They must have 17 or 18 in this game. I just love a game where everything is equally matched and the ball has to go up in the air to determine a winner.
You've made one point with more emphasis than the other, that Staubach has to hit Dupree.
I think so, only because of the way that Pittsburgh plays defense. I think they have to get to Dupree in the middle early, and they will be successful.
Well, with all that speed in the secondary, they won't get much chance to talk during the course of today's game, so let's listen now to the men who will be making the news, the matchups between those defensive backs and the wide receivers.
I think Benny Barnes and Aaron Kyle do a very, very good job for them. I think that if any team is given enough time, they can throw the ball on them. That's a situation that's pretty true for any NFL team.
Stallworth adds an extra problem in that we won't be able to double up on Swan throughout the day. Of course, if we put him in a passing situation, our nickel defense, our 4-0 defense, we'll be able to keep him off balance pretty good about who we're doubling, and not really double one man every time. We'll be able to keep them guessing about who will be doubling, but we can't just single in on Swan because Stallworth is such a strong force over there, very balanced passing attack.
You can't be too cautious against a guy like Tony because he's almost something similar to O.J., and you got to take it to him. You can't let him take it to you, and you can't sit back and let him do what he wants to do. You got to go at him. So I would say be more aggressive and go get him instead of him. So you waiting on him to make the move on you.
But he's a good cornerback. His biggest concern, my biggest concern for him is his size, is 6'4", 215, big advantage over me. So I'm going to try to use quickness to combat his size and strength.
The roof of the press box in the Orange Bowl gives one almost a surrealistic view of this Super Bowl 13. The painting itself, the carpet, the way it has been artfully decorated as part of the scene. And now both clubs are out warming up, the Dallas Cowboys and the Pittsburgh Steelers. And you can just feel now the drama building as fans have had a chance to cheer for the first time for both their Steelers and their Cowboys. Boy, they played in Super Bowl 10. They say that's the best Super Bowl of them all. Lynn Swann would certainly agree, and so would Harris in Super Bowl 9.
The year was 1975. On January 12th, an icy wind swirled around Tulane Stadium, site of Super Bowl 9, where a veteran Minnesota Viking squad met the young and tough Pittsburgh Steelers, outright conference champions for the first time in their history. Minnesota head coach Bud Grant knew that the steel curtain would have to be neutralized in order to win. But this the Vikings could not do, as Pittsburgh held Minnesota to only 119 yards in total offense. Steeler fullback Franco Harris shattered the Super Bowl rushing record set only a year before by carrying